Nekoma was started by a nationwide group that wanted to have one day of protest against the development of atomic weapons, nuclear weapons, and anti-ballistic missiles. Governor Guy and his staff had been told ahead of time by the state superintendent of highway patrol that this was going to be organized and it was going to happen. So he had forewarning that he should prepare for it. Hi, I'm Mitch Vance. If you've been following my presentations and video about the massacre at Kent State, you will know that this is the second part of a two-part presentation. The Kent State massacre we've done, we have a video made, and this is the bookend. This is how Governor Guy, Bill Guy, handled a demonstration coming up in North Dakota just 14 days after the Kent State shootings. And where his opinion was, in 1968, Bill Guy on March 7th wrote a letter to Lyndon Johnson because President Johnson had asked him to go on a fact-finding tour of Vietnam just to come back and tell him exactly what was going on there. And, excuse me, the content of this letter is startlingly well written, and it provides his frame of mind 2 years before we actually were looking at withdrawing from Vietnam. And I would like to start today by giving credit to Governor Guy's daughter, Nancy Guy, several years ago, called my attention to her father's reaction to Kent State and how it set the tone for his handling of an anti-ballistic missile demonstration that was being planned for Nekoma, where the missile site was being constructed at the time. And through Nancy's calling my attention to this and the autobiography that he wrote, When There Was Never a Discouraging Word, I read his excerpts from his book, and it's very detailed how he planned and executed the handling of Nekoma. And it struck me right away that Bill Guy was a different, almost the opposite of the former Governor Rhodes of Ohio, who was running the Kent State situation. And Governor Rhodes in Ohio did everything you could possibly do wrong, and it cost people their lives. And Bill Guy, as I examined the entirety of his reaction, he did, in my opinion, everything right. So I approached Clay Jenkinson, the state humanities director and a scholar himself, and with the proposal, let's do a presentation comparing Bill Guy's handling of Nekoma compared to Governor Rhodes' handling of Ohio, Kent State, because in my opinion, I immediately saw the value of Bill Guy's leadership, and I saw that, and I thought, in order to understand Kent State better, you needed to understand Governor Guy's handling of Nekoma. And if you understood Governor Guy's handling of Nekoma, you would have a deeper understanding and appreciation for what went wrong at Kent State. They just needed to be together. And I also felt that, you know, you've heard the saying, the prophet is never recognized in his own village. And I believe that Governor Guy was underappreciated, underrated, for many reasons. One, because he was a North Dakota native, and you know, he was a farm boy and from humble beginnings, and people from North Dakota would tend not to appreciate him quite like someone who was from another area. And I grow more and more convinced of his value, not only as a state governor, but he was a man of national stature. And what I want to point out here, if I can move this over, this is the result of this. At the time when Clay Jenkinson and I got together and collaborated, they were just making the Bill Guy documentary, The Charisma of Competence. And so it was perfect. He wanted a segment about Kent State in the documentary. So he knew that I had been at Kent and had all this personal involvement. So in the making of this documentary, they interviewed me for maybe 6-7 hours. And some excerpts from the interviews with me are included in this documentary. And so I would tell people, as we talk about Nekoma, if you really, I only have enough time to go through some details just to whet your interest. But if you want to know all the details about Nekoma and his preparation from interviews with his staff, it's all in this documentary, and I'm sure that there are plenty of these available at the Heritage Center. But I highly recommend that everyone who has an interest in this, please look for this. And the other thing I have to tell you today is when you're going over an event that happened 30, 40, 50 years ago, every time you go back and re-examine your own attitudes or the attitudes of the country, I always come up with an epiphany. Oh, why didn't I know this when this was going on? Excuse me. So, with that in mind, I've had the same epiphany here. Nancy Guy was kind enough several years ago to provide me with a copy of her father's letter, which you will be able to see as we prepare this video. But in this documentary, his depth of knowledge of what was going on, he says it better than anybody I've read over these years about the turmoil of the Vietnam era. You know, it was very painful for us, those of us back home that were dealing with a needless war that was obvious to everyone that it was time to do something. It's a very detailed position statement, and one of the best ones I've ever read about our predicament in Vietnam, and that's of course what all these demonstrations were about. So what I will do is I will read you selections directly from his letter. And I'll start with the first one on the front page. Since January 1st, and this is Bill Guy speaking to Lyndon Johnson through this letter, I have participated in 7 Democratic Party workshops across North Dakota. About 75 precinct committeemen, legislative district chairmen, women's club officials, and representatives of Young Democrats clubs were present at each workshop. And then he goes on to say, a profound change has taken place in our thoughts about Vietnam in recent months. Without any coaching or without leading questions by our party leaders, I have found a wholesale abandonment of confidence in our mission in Vietnam. Now, the noteworthy thing here is this is in blue state or red state, North Dakota. North Dakota citizens, Democrats, through the primary process, as they were talking to their governor, these views of the uselessness and waste of life in Vietnam were boiling up to the top without any coaching from Governor Guy. And this, again, I will point out, was in 1968, 2 years before Kent State. Now, here are some comments from his letter that belie a deeper understanding of the conflict than anyone else, in my opinion, expressed, at least publicly. And this, by the way, wasn't made public. This was a letter. Many people believe that the historic Vietnamese dislike of the Chinese presents a stronger containment of Red China than our own presence in Southeast Asia. The Vietnamese did not like the Chinese. And through my experience through the years, I have talked to several Chinese soldiers, former Chinese soldiers in the Red Army, who served in Vietnam as technical advisors to the Vietnamese. And they have corroborated this very attitude. Those two nationalities didn't like each other very much. They had been historically enemies through the centuries. And one of our original purposes, Bill goes on to say, was to defend the villages and cities in South Vietnam from terrorism until that country could build its own defense. Now, the killing of civilians in South Vietnam and the destruction of cities because of our presence far exceeds the very thing we went there to prevent. We were causing more damage than the enemy to the South Vietnamese. And this is another startling piece from his letter. Our expenditures for the military in Vietnam are said to be in excess of $2 billion a month. The curious position of spending nearly as much for destruction in 1 month as we spend constructively in foreign aid for the rest of the world in a whole year. That was $2 billion a month. And think about that, 55 years ago, almost 55 years ago. That's how much we were spending to destroy parts of that country. And he goes on to say, what a massive construction program we could engage in abroad and at home if we were not saddled by the fantastic expenditures of this fantastic military action in Vietnam. And of course, there are other points about the letter, but I just thought we would briefly this morning just review this as we compare the actions of Bill Guy versus Governor Rhodes, because really it's easy. And when I first started researching this, it was easy just to look at, well, this is Governor Bill Guy versus Governor Rhodes on a state level. I never thought and never recognized that he was a man of national stature. This position paper, if you were President of the United States, if he put this in your hands, you would find in this letter not only what was really happening and the destruction we were causing, he also provided alternative actions to get us out of there, things that might work. if we just would be willing to give peace a chance. And that's an old 60s saying, just give peace a chance. And to me, the most startling statement is, if we wanted to contain Red China in Southeast Asia, we just had to listen to the locals. And it seems to me like other conflicts the United States has been involved in, overseas and at home, we don't always know who our enemies are. You know, who's your enemy and who's your friend? And if you're in a war, you're in a country trying to fight a war, and you don't know who the good guys are, well, you got a problem, because you have to be committed. And that's the trouble our troops were having. And sometimes we get into predicaments, and this is no exception in Vietnam. Sometimes there are no good guys. Sometimes you're involved in something that is so foreign to you and so complicated that you would have been better off staying at home. And that's not always been my position, but that's just one of the things, one of my little Mitchisms I'd like to bring out here. Sometimes there are no good guys, and our intelligence community seems to think you can work with bad guys as well. And they don't care how bad you are as long as you're supporting our interest. I mean, I'm going far afield here, but let's get back to the comparisons between Governor Rhodes, which was my initial initiative here. Governor Guy set a different tone. Governor Guy was cooperative. He wasn't confrontational. Governor Rhodes rode into town on his white horse, behind in his run for the Senate, and he was going to be the law and order candidate. We're going to put a stop to this, blah, blah, blah. What Governor Guy did was he sat down and talked to all the parties involved. He talked to the mayors and the leaders of the communities, the surrounding communities that would be affected by this, because he knew ahead of time that the ABM missile site, they were going to have a protest. So he was in preparation for that, and considering his environment that he was operating in, he set a different path. He talked to, he went to the campus a few days ahead of the demonstration. He talked to faculty members. He talked to the students. And the interesting thing about talking to the students, Governor Guy was the captain of the ship, and he was military, so he told them exactly what he would do, and then he told those young people, this is what I expect from you. You have a responsibility here, as well as myself. I will do everything I can, and I'm paraphrasing here. I don't have all the direct quotes, and most of this I got from his own book. Never was heard, a discouraging word. But he said, I will do everything I can to protect everybody. I will protect the communities around that are concerned about destruction to their towns and cities. I will protect you, the demonstrators, and I will protect the other surrounding communities, and I will not let anyone attack you, and I don't expect you to attack them. I expect you to be as good as you can be, and I'll be as good as I can be. Now that's my little painting of the attitude. But what he did also, he recognized that the very presence of a military force is a provocation. The local people, if you load that campus with National Guard troops, it will happen, just as Governor Rhodes got in Ohio. You will get people killed, or at least in danger of being killed. So Bill Guy said, yes, I will have the National Guard, excuse me, on training duty that weekend. They will be out of sight. You will see no uniformed officers at the missile site, on the way, or on campus, you know. But believe me, they will be there. They will be at the ready. And again, I emphasize, he made it clear, to protect you as well. And as it turned out, it was a muddy, rainy day, and Governor Guy and his staff, they knew that people would be getting stuck in ditches, and it was, you know, they would be walking and so on. So he had 2 National Guard tow trucks, and he told them to wear civilian clothes and patrol the highway, and if anybody needs to get out of the ditch or to be helped out of the mud, you help them, no charge, you know, but you don't need to let them know you're the National Guard. So he did everything he could to keep their presence. And then at the site itself, he asked the contractors, the federal contractors, they're going to be coming, if you could construct a little platform somewhere out of the actual hole, you know, to the side, and set up, just build a platform and give them a microphone and let them speak their piece. Let them, you know, as long as they're peaceful, you know, let them say their piece and, you know, clean up afterwards. But get the heavy equipment that you're using safely out of the way. Put it, you know, down in the hole. So the contractors and the military person that was involved in the project said, okay. And so they did that. And you will find later, especially if you follow the video, the documentary, that worked out just fine. But here was the other part of the story. On the national level, Bill Guy was friends, personal friends, with members of the Nixon administration. The Mitchells, John Mitchell, the Attorney General. He even knew Nixon personally. Didn't have a lot of regard for him. He considered him a demagogue. But there were Richard Kleindinks, and they started calling Bill and demanding that he bring out the National Guard to protect that federal facility. And Bill said, no, as a governor, I have no constitutional responsibility to provide protection for a federal property. He said, you have 800 military policemen in my state. We have an Air Force base here, and I think there were 2 Air Force bases and other federal facilities. If you can't get enough military police to protect your own facilities, don't count on me, because I'm just not going to do that. It's not my job. And see, here's another thing. He understood his legal responsibilities as a chief executive of this state. That was the important thing. And he also, personally, he believed in your right to peaceably assemble and have a demonstration. And many people in the country in those days, and even today, they're not real happy with you gathering someplace on the corner and expressing your opinion, because immediately they'll call it a riot, and, you know, bad things will happen. So but he personally believed in that, and that was his morality and his value system coming through. To me, the other thing about Bill Guy's leadership is that he loved the people he was leading. He knew that the young people in North Dakota would behave properly. He had faith in that. He had confidence that they would. And He wanted to be the leader of North Dakota because he loved his state and he loved his constituency, whether they were Democrat or Republican. And that's what was desperately missing in Kent State. As I've said, Rhodes came in, he demanded, Governor Rhodes demanded that the university turn over complete control of the campus to him and his National Guard generals. He had 2 generals that he brought to the campus. Otherwise, he said, we're not coming in at all. And Governor Rhodes had originally been asked by the mayor of Kent to bring the National Guard close by, so if he needed help controlling a crowd in town, he said, I don't have the police personnel to do it. But Rhodes wouldn't turn a finger unless he could actually take over the campus. So he came in on a Saturday night making inflammatory comments about the students who were demonstrating. And this is, that's what happened. He changed the whole mood, because before Governor Rhodes actually got there, the students and the Guardsmen were playing pinochle together. They were talking, but then when that governor came in with that inflammatory rhetoric, then things went south. Things got violent. So again, that's the contrast. Governor Guy was cooperative. And there were other campuses around the country, by the way, that were also cooperative, and no violence ever happened. But the thing about Nekoma is it was considered by Time magazine to be a complete flop because there was no violence. Nothing dramatic happened. So by definition, in the public's mind, even the public of North Dakota, well, that was a big nothing. That was a nothing sandwich. Nothing happened. But the irony there is that the success of confronting civil disturbance is that nothing happens. That's success. And so Bill Guy has never been given credit by anybody in his community, hardly, for making nothing happen. Okay, that went away. And another visual that I would give you to show is the geographic location of the towns around Nekoma. And one of the towns south of there, my brother-in-law was teaching high school. So he heard about the festival of Peace and Love that was going to be held. That was what it was called, by the way. And if I asked somebody in North Dakota, did you ever hear about the International Conference of Peace and Love in North Dakota? They would say, no. Have you heard about Zip to Zap? Oh yeah, my buddies and I went to Zip to Zap. That was in 1969. And but this event, no. And I've often said this about people who sometimes have to do nothing to be successful, is that that's a talent. And one of my standing jokes is, when you're a governor of North Dakota, most of the residents here will say, if you do nothing, you're just fine. And they become experts at doing nothing. And if you think it's easy to wake up in the morning and plan to do nothing, first of all, if you don't have a plan to do nothing, somebody's going to put you to work. And so a successful governor in North Dakota after Bill Guy was to successfully do nothing, and then they don't get in trouble. Okay, that's my little piece of humor for today. But getting back to Bill, Governor Guy, I should say, I don't mean to be disrespectful. He acted like the model chief executive of the state. I'm going to protect everybody, and I'm going to be even-handed about this. I'm going to tell everybody what I expect of them, because I'm the boss. And this is what you can expect from me. So when you have that clear line of communication with all the leadership around you, then you can't help but be successful. So successful that nobody appreciates. Well, nothing happened. So, but I also wanted to provide a little bit of background on what the climate of opinion was at the time Bill was considering what to do. There had been a week before a shooting at Jackson State University where 11 students were wounded and 2 young girls were killed in a sorority house. The local police lined up in front and during the night and opened fire. And of course, 2 weeks before, we had had the massacre at Kent State. And the demonstrations had been going on throughout the country. There was violence in Wisconsin, by the weathermen of the SDS. So there was a lot of sparks in the air. There was a tremendous amount of anger. And so Bill, and he had some advisors. Bill had a group called the Kitty Corps. The Republicans called Bill's group of kids. So all of them, the 2 weeks building up to Nekoma, they all were aware and knowledgeable about Kent State, and some of his advisors on his staff were talking to him about, we don't want another Kent State here. But I kind of digressed from the pressure from the President Nixon's administration. They sent out a team to North Dakota when they heard that this was going to happen, a crisis team. And they actually asked Governor Guy, do you have air service to North Dakota? And Governor Guy assured them that, yes, we have air service and we're not living in teepees or, mud huts. We have modern facilities. And, but you don't need to come here. We don't have a crisis here, And so finally, under pressure, tremendous pressure from John Mitchell and Kleindienst and others, they said, now, are you really saying to us, your friends, that you're not going to help us with this? He said, well, not only am I not going to call out the National Guard, if those demonstrators need another warm body, I will be out there demonstrating with them, because I think this ABM missile site is a total waste of tax dollars. I don't want it built in my state. So yes, I'm not going to help you. And I'm not going to expose our citizens to this kind of danger. This is a new book that came out just a few weeks ago. It was published. And this is written by an historian. And it's probably one of the most complete histories of what actually happened that day from all kinds of perspectives, from talking to wounded students to the parents of children that died. And this author thinks, he's ambitious enough to think that this will be the definitive history of Kent State. And on that issue, I think it's a fool's errand, because I think we're going to be discovering things about this complicated event going back a long time. And like I said, every time I pick up the research and start to look through it again, something new pops. I get a new epiphany. The epiphanies of Mitch. And one of the epiphanies here is there was a lot of cruelty that's never been brought out. Little things that were done to people, to the victims, to the dead students when they got to the hospital. But it's all in this book. This gentleman covers that. So I would highly recommend anybody that wants to know more about that history. And by the way, it's a very quick read. It reads almost like a novel. It's not a dry history book. But like every historian, you kind of have to read through it and say, okay, I don't know about that. You know, you got to prove that to me if you're a critical thinker. But this was the first presentation that I collaborated with Clay Jenkinson to bring to the public attention at the Heritage Center in 2010. And this was just before this came out. But we had been on to this, and Clay Jenkinson and I had been working on this presentation and collaborating for quite a few months. Obviously, this is an ongoing project for me to come back and revisit this every year and to do these presentations as often as I can, because first of all, it had a big impact on my life. It changed my direction. It changed a lot of things that I won't go into, but I also want people to never forget what a painful period of time this was, and that it was a national tragedy. And that's what this author points out. It was a national tragedy, and it happened to be one that I was involved in on the periphery. And I always say this, I was not an eyewitness. I did not get shot. I was threatened and confronted by a couple of guardsmen, but I had nightmares about it. And any person that I talked to that lived through this era, they said, and I say, it's painful. It brings back painful memories. But I feel like I should do it to honor the dead and to let the country know this can and probably will happen again in some form or another. Kent State was a state-sanctioned event. The state governor caused this to happen, or was one of the causes. I shouldn't say totally, but the school shootings now have become so common, and they're carried out by almost anybody, whether they're teenagers, they're people that have all kinds of mental disorders perhaps, but that's not to say there's anything wrong with being mentally ill. Most mental patients do not do this kind of thing. I mean, I could go on and on about this, but I just want to remind people, someone who's pointing a gun at you is not your friend. And by all means, no matter how old you are or how young you are, obey. You know, keep your hands in the air. I mean, I could go on and on, but, and you will no doubt hear from me again. And thank you very much for your attention and your interest.